My Facebook group?
Right here. We're live.
Okay.
I had to click it one more time. Yeah, I just shared that in the Embodied Asian Man. So
Oh, did you? Nice.
yeah.
Okay, sweet, man.
Yeah, man. Dude, I'm excited. I guess I'll do my regular intro here. This
Cool.
is The Journey Within. So welcome, guys. Appreciate you tuning in and being a part of this conversation. And so this is The Journey Within. It's a journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of a death and rebirth. And today I am very excited and nervous to be talking with someone that's honestly kind of rare in this space. um and I remember like just um when you added me on Facebook and seeing your post, I actually saw you on some Asian group that you posted on, and I'm like, this guy would be a cool guy to interview.
Mm,
So I'm just really excited to talk to Samuel Shin,
hmm
who has experience in psychotherapy, and he just has this unique um, perspective, being that he's Asian and has been a psychotherapist. And so, Samuel, I am very, very honored to be talking with you today, man.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's a very touching intro. And yeah, I was wondering where we found each other. Was it Asian Hustle Network?
Might have been that one. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you made a post and then I was like, oh, dude, this is interesting.
Yeah.
And you were
Yeah,
talking
and
about some really cool stuff.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and we'll talk about it, but yeah, I feel seen, which is rare in the Asian space, to have people recognize like kind of who I am and the work that I've done. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Same, man. So, is there anything maybe I missed? I know I did a brief intro, but maybe you just describe who you are and what you do.
Okay. So right now I'm a transformational coach. I work with Asian men. I'm also a certified men's work facilitator. I used to be a therapist, and I practiced therapy for like 6 to 7 years. And it was a holistic, alternative type of training and education, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But it was it's like transpersonal psychology, humanistic psychology. Yeah, so my training in therapy is also quite different than most therapists. Um, but yeah, I don't subscribe to any role. It's hard to fit into a role because I've had such a diverse range of experience, and as much as I've done coaching and men's work or therapy, I've also been a meditator for a really long time and was really intensely involved with that, and like enlightenment seeker kind of person. And that was, I would say, as transformative as a lot of these other things. And sexuality too, practices around sexuality have been as healing and powerful as therapy and other types of, so I have a very interesting background and training, but I would say my approach is really about like who we are as human beings, and
Mm.
like fundamentally, and how do we live in a way that's we're fully expressing who we are as human beings, which I think is probably a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, what do you think inspired you to get to this place, or like, what actually started you on this curious journey to not only like the therapy but the spirituality as well?
hmm
Were you like always interested in that kind of thing?
hmm Um, yeah, it's one of I kind of was. I mean, so I grew up Christian, very Christian, fundamentalist kind of Christian Korean,
Nice.
in
Did you?
Texas, right? You're in Plano,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Wait. So, oh
And
yeah, are you from? You're from the
I grew up
Dallas
in
area, aren't you?
Carrollton. Yeah,
Bro, okay. Oh my gosh, that's a small world, man. Yeah, of
it
course. So
is.
all the Koreans are in Carrollton.
Right.
Did you? I wanted to ask you. Did you speak in tongues?
My parents did,
Okay, okay,
and the adults did, but the kids didn't. But
gotcha.
my dad became a pastor, and like it was a
Whoa.
big part of my upbringing. And then so that was kind of spiritual. Like I kind of had to rediscover my relationship to Jesus as an adult, and more recently, just in the past few years. But because that name was so loaded, but um, but yeah, when I was younger, I was very passionate about, all that, Jesus and worshiping. I loved, so in some ways that might be like like something spiritual, but I would say it's predominantly religious. Like it was very strictly religious without too much of the spirituality. I would say my entry into spirituality really started with drugs, actually.
Yo.
As a teenager, yeah, I got really into drugs, and um, I was just a very introspective guy, young kid, and um, yeah, so I used drugs as a way to deepen my understanding of myself and like experience myself, and it wasn't healthy, but it definitely opened me up to a realm of consciousness that I'm not even talking about like acid or psychedelics. It was just drugs in general. They just kind of gave me a different experience of myself and life, and that was definitely, I guess, the catalyst, or like the first entryway um, into, I would say, spirituality. And then, I had a big shift around 18, 19 and got into psychology, really obsessed with psychology. Then a few years after that, found meditation and just dove into meditation super deeply. I would say my aim in life were two things. Well, really, one was like, how do I be myself? It's like, I want to be myself, and how do I do that? And
Yeah.
growing up Asian and very traditional family, I felt a lot of um, there wasn't a guide. There wasn't any, and there was a lot of suppression. There was a lot of it's the exact opposite of being yourself. As
Yeah.
in an
Yeah.
Asian family, it's like it's about the family, it's about community, it's about other people. It's like it's never about who you are and who you want to be. But I maybe because I grew up in the West, like my parents were from Korea, but I was born here. Like I just had this strong impulse. My brother too, but he kind of went a different route to express myself and be myself. And I fought tooth and nail for it. And that's what drew me to psychology was this interest in knowing who I was. So yeah, that path took me down a lot of routes, and then it took me to that school, that very alternative school.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's, I think, and that question of who am I and how do I be myself, that is such a deep question that's
Yeah.
what catalyzed all this shifts in my life and this transformation and this healing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's a great question. And it's like I'm just thinking about it like so I grew up very similarly, right? Christian as well. At
Right.
some point I did speak in tongues later.
Mm, okay.
So yeah, and I'm thinking like growing up Asian plus the fundamentalism is like the worst combo for wanting to be yourself,
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
like both of us got this double whammy. Um, was there a point where you really started to, I guess, understand yourself? You actually started to express yourself more, I guess, readily, more
Hmm.
authentically. Was there a
Hmm.
point where that started for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was really when I went to grad school. So up until that point, I was kind of doing drugs off and on. I was really into neuroscience. I was very academic in undergrad. I was a neuroscience researcher. I was studying like the brain and how it, the underlying causes of the neurological underpinnings of behavior, cognition, like, addiction to all these things, but like from a neurological perspective. And I was very academic. I was very heady. I was very philosophical. And then I happened to go to this grad school in San Francisco that had some like Buddhist and like Hindu influence, and so that just interested me. I wasn't into any of that at the time, um, but I wasn't a Christian either at the time. I had kind of let that go and opened up more just to philosophy and stuff like that. But going to the school, it's called CIIS in the California Institute of Integral Studies, and basically it's like that was the turning point because I through instead of being just in my head, that program forced me to experience change and experience healing and experience myself, and maybe ways that didn't even know myself. Like the first semester I was in a class, I like to tell this story, but I was in a class, group dynamics. We're learning how to do group therapy by experiencing it ourselves. So the teacher is basically the group therapist. So the whole program, this whole school is based on experiential learning. It's not, there was one test in my 3 years of being at the school. Like, it's all just experience, and then writing about your experiences, like the assignments. So experiential learning, we're thrust into this environment where we're learning through the experience of the theories and the principles. So they talked about the self. It's called T group. Have you heard of T group before?
No.
T group is basically you're in a group, and the only things you can talk about are a feeling or a sensation. I think this is T group / encounter group. But you're responding to each other by saying basically like nonviolent communication style, like, hey, like when you said that, I felt this, like there was a warmth in my heart, or, you know, I felt ashamed because I was thinking you were judging me. So you're just literally talking from your personal experience, feelings and physical sensations. You're not even allowed to say what you're thinking, like your thoughts. You just say, I'm having a thought, and then you just let it go, but you're not allowed to share the thought. Like you're just talking about literally. So I'm thrust into this environment without having any experience of any of this stuff. Never done any workshops or spiritual shit. And I had panic attack. I was like in there freaking out. I didn't know it at the time, but I was just like tense. And then after the class, I saw that I popped a blood vessel because it was just like, I was so tense. And, but the you know, that's kind of how the whole program went, was like talking about your own experience and focusing on that. And that's what I needed. I needed to like look inside and identify that I have a self, that I have these thoughts, emotions, feelings, needs independent of other people or parents. And, you know, that like, that's the Asian thing, right? It's like, there's no fucking boundaries. You're just like, your parents are telling you who you are, but that's like their shit. And like, you're kind of forced to like, you know, like listen to them, and like, you know, like, and they shut your emotions. So it was like, that was the beginning of this unfolding and this unfurling of like who I was inside, and these emotions and things like that, especially emotions. But, you know, the next semester I took a workshop on sexuality and doing these meditations with people where I'm like touching their lower, like we're basically touching each other's genitals and shit. Like Yo. In this deep.
What is this school?
What is this very, school, very alternative. And and then I did, anyways. So there was a very focused on like experience and focusing on the experience of your humanness, right? And so that's that was a huge, that was just everything for me, you know, like that, like being able to dive into these parts of myself and really explore them in a beautiful way, in a safe way too. And I mean, my experience wasn't everybody else's experience, but I really got a lot out of it. And it was, I would say I birthed a self through that process, which is, I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
Let's talk about that.
That's something that I think a lot of Asian people don't quite understand is what is the self, right? The self as a unique, independent or individualistic self, an entity, independent of other, you know? So I would say that program helps me do that in a big way.
Interesting. And so would you say that we birth this self through becoming aware of our desires and emotions?
I would say the self is the reason how do I say this? The self needs to be supported, seen. Like basically it happens in families. The self, we all have a self. We all have a unique expression that we're born with. You can call it the soul. You can call it, you know, personality, temperament, whatever. We're all born with that, whether you're Asian or not. But in Asian families, the conditions are not such that parents or the child will be able to have their self structure, I guess, if you will, develop. So it's like, here's this child, this like amorphous, just no self thing that's born, but it has like this light to it. And then like as it develops emotions, as it develops thought, as it develops personality, the parents are kind of there to see this child, reflect back and attune to this child, and all like really see them for who they are. I mean, the ideal is to see the child as they are, right? Doesn't mean you just like cater to their every whim or desire. That they need boundaries as well. But it's through that process of relationship and attunement and reflection that the child begins to understand himself and know himself and develop a healthy ego, is what you call it in psychology, a healthy
Right.
self-regulating system that kind of understands himself or herself and has emotions and needs and all these things. And that's just not, that's just something that's not there for Asian parents for the most part. Like I'd say like 90 something percent. As far as what I've seen working with the Asian community, I've seen some families or some people who I'm like, wow, their parents were different than most Asian parents. But that process not being there, it just doesn't allow for this thing to develop, this what I'm calling the self in a lot of Asian people. And so, yeah, that's what I would say as far as like where that comes from. I forgot what your question was, but
I forgot my question too.
Yeah.
But so I have a curious question, and sorry I didn't prepare you for this.
No, it's okay.
Why do you think, like, what is it about Asian culture? And this is like maybe like a two-part question. So, in your opinion, what is it about Asian culture that doesn't do that? And then maybe my follow-up question would be, it seems to have worked all of these centuries, right? Asians have been existing for a long time. So it seems to have worked for a long time. But now that we're in the West, it seems like it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if my question there, more like a comment. But...
Yeah. I mean, the quick answer is like, there's like the collectivistic and then the individualistic culture and the contrast between that. And I think there's obviously some truth to that. But I think if you go deeper, it's like I think it comes down to resources, to be honest. I think it comes down to resources, maybe education, but really resources. Because if resources are limited, then the family needs to survive together and everybody needs to kind of play their part. If one person's like, I want to be myself and I want to go fucking over, to that other tribe and like, I like them, like that's just not kosher. The family's not going to survive, right? So in some ways, Asian cultures, they're only newly kind of developing into first world countries. By and large, they've been third world countries. So I think you can also see this in other cultures as well that are not as developed as Western society, like third world countries and things like that. So I think that's a big part of it. But there is also the like whole Confucian thing, the whole like parents are fucking God, and the children they're just meant, like, it's you're supposed to teach them and they're supposed to be respectful, and like there's an inherent power dynamic. Like it's I mean, I grew up, I don't know, where's your family from? Is it
Taiwan?
Taiwanese?
Yeah,
like in Korean culture, like I grew up, like my friends who were like 1 year older than me or even less, like I had to defer to them, like they were my elders in a way. Like I had to call them hyung, and they would like, they'd like hit me and shit if I didn't like respect them,
shit.
And and people say, I've heard that Korean culture is one of the most Confucian, Korean and Japanese.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So you get that a lot too, this real power dynamic, and this parents are the authority. And so in that type of environment, you're going to get this treatment of children that is not conducive to this independent individual, unique expression or unique human. It's more just like kind of objects and cogs in a wheel. That's my theory, at least. Like I mean, everybody just talks about collectivism and individualism, but I'm like, I don't know. I think there's something about like the lack of resources and what that does. It's just survival. There's lack of education. Yeah, different things like that, I would say. Again, I forgot your question. It was like, what is causing? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, that was really that's really interesting. I had not thought about all of those factors together. So okay,
Yeah.
that's cool, man. Going back to developing the self, the ego. So you're saying once we're witnessed as a unique individual, we become aware of our emotions.
Yep.
Is there anything else other than those things? I might have missed it. That would help us to develop a healthy sense of self.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many. This is like the basis of all therapy. Is
Yeah.
you know, how do you develop healthy emotions, emotional regulation, healthy beliefs, you know, trauma, all that stuff. So I guess if we're going to stay on the self aspect, though, I do think that if you didn't get emotional attunement and reflection, like certain conditions met, like unconditional love, unconditional acceptance, these types of things in family, you're always going to have some problems, whether you're Asian or not. It's gonna you're going to develop something's going to go not so optimally in your system, or not going to develop optimally because those conditions that allow for this growth and this development of the self, or whatever you want to call it, didn't go optimally either, right? So like you're going to need to get those needs met in some way. And I think that's a lot of the value of therapy, and whether it's coaching or healing relationships. Yes, there's all these techniques and stuff like that, but in the end, like the relationship is really like, you know, like you work with a coach who doesn't really see you and understand you, or, you know, care about you. Like that's not going to go anywhere. You know, like the work is going to be, it doesn't matter what techniques they have. Like maybe it's going to go somewhere if the person like, I could see it happening, but yeah, anyways, I think those needs do need to get met at some point. Which is the value of a lot of like healing relationships, and so those places in you or whomever, like that, this where the self is, it's maybe stuck or not quite developed, or, you know, there's some unresolved issues or trauma, like that I think needs to be seen, you know, and be accepted and understood and supported in a way that's going to allow that to heal. So and then through that process, the self kind of strengthens, or, you know, they develop some better capacity to regulate themselves. You know, like there's a concept in therapy called transmuting internalization. This is an alternative. This is from self psychology, which isn't what a lot of you know, therapists will have learned. But transmuting internalization is basically this function that parents usually provide for the child, that eventually the child then learns through this modeling and through this, like, basically the child internalizes that function. So like if parents know how to regulate their own emotions, that just becomes imparted onto a child, right? Or if the parents, you know, have positive self-talk, or if they, you know, are loving and you know, like those things will become imparted onto the child through this process of internalization. And you know, maybe you have experiences like that. I've definitely had experiences with therapists where after working with them, I still think about them, or I thought about them for a while, maybe a couple of years after, but then I just, that whatever they provided for me became ingrained. Like the way that my therapist, her compassion towards me during times when I didn't know how to have compassion for myself, like that, I saw it, I felt it, and then I remembered it, and then like now I don't think about her at all. Like it's just become a part of who I am, you know. So yeah, that's kind of, I think I'm just talking about relational healing, but the mechanism behind it and how that impacts the self, right? How that allows for these parts of us to heal and to develop and strengthen and all that. So
yeah. Where does that play into developing as a man and being quote unquote masculine? Because when I think of masculine, and maybe this is just my conception, right? I think of like David Goggins,
For sure.
that kind of
Yeah.
like note and tough love, like,
Right.
yeah.
Or maybe even Tony Robbins or something, right? Like,
Yeah.
right. Okay. So what's your question? It's where does all that play
Yeah,
into masculinity?
yeah, like being
That's a good question.
masculine.
I think that's a really good question, because I think up until this point we've been talking about maybe more of a feminine, um, like I'm talking about compassion, unconditional love, like these emotional attunement. A lot of that comes from mothers, right? A lot of that's
Yeah.
provided for early on in life, where in childhood, and the mother is really important and provides that nurturing environment. Yeah, I think fatherhood and masculinity is something that's sort of similar. Like I think the attunement still needs to be there, the unconditional love, but it's definitely more like tough love, right? Like you said tough love, right? So
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
I think both are essential. Like I literally think there's two types of love, right? Like the nurturing kind, and then like the type that's like get up off your ass and like do the shit you need to do, and like, you know, yeah, fuck man up or whatever. Like literally that masculine energy, and it doesn't have to be just for men, but that is provided for by the father in a way. Or I think it can be a social environment. Um, but I think the father is also an important piece to all this, because if the father isn't providing this, or the father isn't present, or loving and supportive in this way, um, then the kid's probably going to have some problems. Like when I hear stories of people who learn masculinity from like other people often, and they didn't have a good model for it, right? Like in a good adult model, it's usually kind of disconnected. It's not it's not coming from a place of integrity. It's not, they didn't develop, there's like a missing experience, because the dad is, as much as the mom is important, the dad's also
Yeah.
important for development, I would say. But yeah, there's not a lot of talk about fatherhood in psychology. It's all about the mom.
Yeah, that is, now that you mention it, that's kind of true. That's I haven't heard a lot about the dad.
Yeah, dad's like later. Dad's like probably 5 and on, but 0 to 5 is typically mom is like really, less and
Yeah.
less the case, but she's the more important figure,
Hmm.
which makes sense.
So I had a question, I kind of forgot it, but what were you talking about? You were talking about
Masculinity.
that. Okay, that's right. Yeah. So when you say masculine, feminine, masculinity, femininity, maybe you could
I
expound
hate
on that.
this
Like, what do
question.
you?
I hate
Huh?
this question. I hate this question. It's yeah. It's very confusing, because the terms themselves are, no matter how much we want to say, oh, you can be a man and have feminine, or you could be a woman and have like it's true, but those words are so associated, and they're really tied in with gender.
Yeah.
So I don't like having that conversation, but the yeah, they're just, there's different qualities, like this is on all levels, like physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Like masculine and feminine are yin and yang. They're two parts of a polarity, So and I do think there's a correlation for sure. And I don't know if this is where you're going, but I need to share my thoughts on this. Like there is a correlation between masculine energy and gender. I mean, there obviously is. Um, but maybe that's going to change in the future. Who knows? But yeah, I think yeah. Even to tell you like what I think masculine energy, what's masculinity, or what's femininity. I don't even know if I want to talk about it, to be honest. I could just feel myself like that
Yeah.
conversation. It's yeah. So if you're interested in that conversation, you could Google it, and there's like so many answers, like literally like qualities of the masculine, qualities of the feminine. I wouldn't disagree with those, to be honest.
Got you. Going back to having a strong father with some tough love, but still emotional attuned.
Mm,
So let's say we never got that, right?
hmm
And it seems like a therapist, generally speaking, is much more quote unquote feminine, right? More
Sure.
compassion, witnessing, all that stuff. So how do we actually do we need this male figure to then kind of like reparent us in a
hmm
sense?
hmm
And if we don't have one, like what do we do to really develop that masculine side?
Mm. Yeah, I could just speak from my own experience and I guess my theories around this, but yeah, I do think it's important to have an actual human being that's there modeling, providing this love and support. Like if we don't get those needs met for a father or a mother, our psyche is just gonna it's not gonna feel whole and complete. Like you can do that healing later on, like if you didn't have those early experiences, but I do think that they need to happen in some form of relationship. um, like we're human beings and we're social creatures, we're relational creatures. That's how we learn. Like there's so much that happens in our brains and our nervous systems and our and who we are through human contact. Like I can like one of my first real exposures, because my father was not, he was not very masculine, let's just say that. Very I wouldn't say feminine per se, but it was just like his masculine energy was not there. And maybe trauma or I don't know, but he was pretty much a young hurt little boy. And so my first model, one of my first models for masculinity was actually Tony Robbins.
Oh,
And it was through, I felt a little bit of the energy and the frequency of whatever my authentic masculinity might look like in him. And it was through the screen, right? Like I didn't go to any workshops, and that was powerful. There was a sense in which that allowed me to develop my masculine energy. But I did also work with male therapists,
okay.
so around that time, maybe even right at that time, I actually had one before that too. Um, but yeah, there's just something about that missing experience of having a father figure not be there, at least in a healthy way, or or maybe at all. But there was something about having a male figure that healed that for me. That healed this wound. And then later, I got into men's work, and I was in these huge retreats with like 100 to 200 men, doing like really intensely masculine things, but also, what might be more the feminine, doing shadow work, diving into emotions and connecting and relating to each other, a lot of physical touch and like hugging and saying I love you, but there was also like wrestling and like just like like just screaming like in the fucking middle of the desert, like that was also something I needed. It was definitely a missing experience for me, and I think it was through those experiences that there was some part of me and my identity that I didn't quite wasn't able to develop in my upbringing, that I was able to develop through those types of works and through those relationships. So I do, yes, to answer your question, I think there does need to be an actual, like, actual human beings, because we are human
Yeah.
beings, right?
Yeah. No, makes sense. So actually this would be a great transition into what do you do in these men's workshop? Like what does men's work really entail?
I think everybody's going to have a different definition. Um, I mean, I have a very simple definition, which is just men supporting other men, right? So, in any environment where you're getting men supporting other men, that's basically not sports. That's not like being in business or sales, or like, I know there's like a bro culture there. It's like something that's more focused on like personal development and helping you be the best version of yourself. So any group of men that are coming together and doing that, or that's men's work, because that's what I've seen being in this space. A lot of people, a lot of different organizations, they're all doing it a little differently, but the essence is the same. It's just when you get a group of men together and the intention is to be real, to be honest, authentic, vulnerable, to not just like to own your shit too, and to not just like project onto other men, because that's what happens in society. Like some man is sharing something vulnerable, the other men feel judged, like they're uncomfortable in themselves with that emotion or that experience, and so then they shut them down, or they give them advice, or that's typically what happens, in my opinion. Like it's projection based. But when you're in an environment of with men who are owning their shit, they're owning their side, and they're not going to jump onto your side, like, and they're just listening, right, and they're just attuning emotionally, right, they're just being present. That's in that type of environment, a lot happens. Like you're breaking paradigms of thousands and thousands of years of men not being able to open up in that way or be real in that way. And talking about fatherhood, right? Like this is a wound that so many men have, fathers who had their own traumas, and maybe they left and they couldn't stick around, or they just weren't present emotionally, or like we also need this intimacy and connection with our dads. And so for thousands and thousands of years, this wound is also there. So with the group that I got trained with, they really incorporate a lot of physical contact, like touch, like intimate touch. I mean, you're not like necessarily holding each other, but actually they do that in the shadow work. Like they literally, a guy is fucking breaking down, bawling, no words even. You're not processing it like therapy. It's just pure emotion with this group. And then there's like 10, 15 other men gathered around him. There's like one or two facilitators who are like kind of leading the way. But everybody puts a hand on the man when he's just like fucking shaking and like, like convulsing or just like screaming, fuck yeah. And it's, and he's being held, like literally held physically by these other men. But there's also just like, putting your hand on another man's heart and just like just connecting in different types of ways. And I think this is, if we're going to talk about masculinity and, where the wound or the, I don't like using toxic masculinity, but like the problems that a lot of men face come from these types of things and these types of environments not being around, and fathers not really being around or being able to support men in the ways that men or boys need. So that's a lot of what men's work is trying to do, is to try to fill that gap and to provide a space where men can heal these wounds.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you're taking things from, well, the very experiential school, meditation, breathing, all these different things. I'm curious on your opinion on like the therapeutic space right now, just more in general, not your more alternative one, but just in general in the West. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think we're doing right? And then what do you think maybe needs some work, some supplementation?
Oh man, I mean, I could talk about this for an hour. Yeah. This is not a popular opinion. Like I left the mental health field, right? I became a coach, became a life coach, teacher, whatever, and I left mental health for the reason that I'm going to talk about, which is I think mental health is a total misnomer. Has nothing to do with, well, it doesn't have nothing to do, but it's not about our mind, just our mind. It's not about mental health. It's not about mental illness. That's just Western society's obsession or fixation on the mind and thinking and rationality and logic, which comes from, Descartes and all that stuff. So like everything in the West is going to be focused on the mind, yeah. Right? So they notice these people who are, exhibiting certain symptoms or not acting normal, and they just say, oh, something's wrong with their minds. And you see this in like Asian cultures too. It's like, oh, like they don't have a word for, like, they just call you, there's something wrong with their mind. I don't think it's a mind thing. The psyche is such a multi-dimensional thing. It's emotions and there's so much more going on than just the mind with mental illness. So I have a problem with just that term. But I think, um, I think my biggest gripe with it is actually that it's part of the Western medical system. And, you know, this is where I'm also pretty alternative. I'm very holistically oriented. I don't like Western medicine. I think it's good.
Interesting.
I think it's good
Oh,
for, very critical conditions and saving people's lives and, like breaking, fixing it. Like, there's a lot of things it's useful for, but as far as healing goes, and as far as human, being a human, which is a lot of what mental illness or these things that develop, like we're talking about earlier, these developmental things that don't go right, that's a human problem. It's not a medical problem. And so right now, there's so much emphasis on the brain, neuroscience, medications, pharmacology, all these things, which are not effective. They really have no place with mental illness. But again, that's a Western thing. It's a Western medical thing. The former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, his name's Tom Insel. He had a quote. He left, and then I think he's working in like tech or something. He's working for like Google, but he had a quote where he's he basically he just said they put all this money, his 13 years of working for the National Institute of Mental Health, put all this money to research genetics, neuroscience, research. What was the outcome? Nothing. Like they weren't any better at solving mental illness. Mental illness actually, got worse. And it's like,
huh.
so he's basically saying that, and that, they don't know how to deal with mental illness. Like the mental health system is broken in this country. And I think that's 100% true. I think there's a lot of good that comes from it, because it's allowing people to have a space to talk about some of the trauma and some of the difficulties and learn about themselves. But by and large, I think the Western mental health system is missing the mark. I think 80% of therapists are not really good therapists.
Whoa, that
Yeah,
is a high number.
it's a really high number. Yeah.
Wow.
And I actually heard that from one of my professors, but I agree. Like, I'm very selective about who my therapists are. And oddly enough, the school that I went to, which, there were no tests, right?
Mhm.
It was just this experiential learning and, humanistic stuff, and like stuff that's kind of woo woo, even like sometimes we meditate before classes. Um, we had the highest rate of students or graduates pass the licensing exam, pass the California licensing exam on the first try. So the first try, graduates are taking, they get out of grad school, they take the exam. CIIS had the number one rate of students who pass out of all of California. I don't know if that's still the case, but a lot of that exam is like intuition. It's like, this client has these problems and this, and what would you do? So it's like,
Hmm.
the school that I went to, just through the experience of going through what clients go through, or healing, or going through our own healing process, we develop a really, really deep and solid understanding of, how to understand people and how to help people. It's intuitive. And that's a rare school. There's only like a few schools like that in the country. And it's an unfortunate thing, but that's obviously I have a bias. Like, I'm very far, like very alternative in a way, but this
Yeah.
is my opinion. It's not something that you're going to hear, from a lot of people. And this isn't even to say that mental health and therapy isn't useful, because the thing that's really good at is understanding trauma. Understanding trauma and connecting that to present behavior, present relationships, problems, and all that.
Yeah.
It's really, really, that's the fundamental basis of all therapy.
Yeah. So, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I found out that a lot of therapists are not trauma informed, which boggles my mind. And it's like, so
Yeah.
I was listening to um, uh, MP3 on like healing shame. It was by these two psychologists, the Center of Healing Shame, and it was a great uh, track to
Mm.
understand that.
Mhm.
And in the introduction, they're saying like, yeah, a lot of therapists don't even know this stuff. And I'm thinking, what the shit? What are you talking about? This is such a basic, like,
Mhm.
things about knowing about healing shame. Like
Yeah.
maybe like every therapist should know about this. I was just like, wait,
Yeah.
let me listen to that again. Wait, a lot of therapists don't even know this. How is that possible? So, anyways, that's my
Yeah,
take.
again, I think it's a huge reason for that is the fact that it's so uh, just embedded in the Western medical system. It's a medical issue. It's not a human issue. This is a problem with your brain. This is a problem with genetics. Uh, the, like CBT, right? The CBT is like the big thing these days, and again, it's because it has the word cognitive in it. Like you're literally working with more concrete things that you can see or that are tangible, like
Right. You
thoughts
can
or
measure.
behavior. Yeah, that you can measure. And there's some places where that's effective, but by and large, like for example, with trauma or pretty much any other mental illness issue, I think um, they're not learning about trauma. It's literally just your thoughts and your behaviors. They're not looking at deeper things that you cannot measure, which, things from childhood, like you can't measure emotions, you can't measure like somebody's like relationship with their mother or father not going, like the things that we talked about earlier with these missing experiences. If you're just focusing on symptoms, if you're just focusing on these things that you can measure, you're not going to look at the link between these like if you if you're a fucking human, you just know, oh, okay, if somebody like was hit as a kid or their parents abandoned, like they're going to have problems. Like why is that so, bizarre to us? And then as they're an adult and then now they're like having these really big problems, then it's like we got to give them meds or we got to like figure out like like what's going on their behavior, like fuck, like it's fucking trauma. And these early experiences, so it's for me, it's again, it's just a very human experience. It's something that comes down to who we are as human beings, and family environments and these conditions that we all need as children to grow up and to be healthy functioning adults. And it's for me it's very intuitive, like it's just that's why I don't even feel like I'm a therapist anymore, because this is just human beings. Like if we were all taught this stuff, like if this was a part of our education as it should be, like
Yeah.
it wouldn't be so, outlandish to talk about this stuff. But like I'm on this podcast with you talking about this as if it's like, and a lot of people, I don't know who's watching, but like this is not just what I'm saying, but a lot of people are eating the shit up, like social media, like there's so much positive psychology and like stuff about healing, and people just they're eating it up because it's resonating, it's touching something in them, and we're just not educated around it.
Yeah.
And we're actually educated like in to think the opposite, right? To think like the brain, the genetics, the
Okay. Yeah.
so that's why we don't really understand it either.
Hmm. Um, could you share about being embodied? And
Mm.
yeah, and like I know you're talking about in the West, it's all about the mind, very Descartes, very Newtonian, cognitive
Mhm.
behavioral therapy. So yeah, could you talk about like being embodied and what does that mean? How do we do that?
Yeah, and I think the reason why you're asking this question is because I have a Facebook group called Embodied Asian Men.
Yeah, yeah.
People don't know, which you're part of, and some other men are a part of. But yeah, I love. I'm glad you asked, because I have a very um, specific kind of theory about this, which is I'm going to drink some water before I get into it. I think you'll understand it.
Mm.
But I don't think I've ever shared this. But there's three processes, and embodiment is the last part. So the first is insight and realizations. Like insight realization is kind of the same, and then you have integration, process of integration, and then you have embodiment. Okay, so you have an insight, you have a realization, whether it's therapy, ayahuasca, like meditation, whatever, right? Hypnosis. Like you have this like it's this experience of a different something different, and like something more expansive, perhaps. That doesn't change your, it takes a while for your brain and your nervous system and your body, like things to change emotionally, right? Like it's not like that insight is going to do everything. That insight is actually going to integrate. And so what that means is, I mean, you could talk about it in terms of like frequencies and stuff like that, but I think you're following me. So that then you have an integration process, and that integration process is like this new experience colliding with the old identities, the old emotions, the old patterns. And that's a difficult process. A lot of people don't recognize that. They, go on an ayahuasca trip, and then they come back and it's like their life starts to fucking fall apart. Like this is supposed to happen, relationships changing. Well, it doesn't even have to be ayahuasca, it's just healing, right? So there's this kind of process of the two kind of coming together and this shift and this transformation happening. That's an integration, right? Like the change, the like transmuting process. And then the embodiment, and that happens through experience, right? The relationships changing, the leaving a job, or like something tangible actually happening, something concrete. And then through those actions and changes, that's where the embodiment happens, right? So that new insight or realization, and I mean, I'm making it so it's like, step by step, but it's, it is kind of like this, but yeah, because you can have more insights and realizations around the same thing. But the embodiment is the end result of all that, right? So now you've embodied that insight and realization in this new way of being, such that it's who you are. It's just like your life is reflecting that, your relationships, your what you're spending your time on, your thoughts, your emotions. Like you've now become a different person. So that's my definition of embodiment, I guess, is like you are embodying it. It's your nervous system. It's like your thinking. Everything is now. Your identity is now that person.
Yeah, that's interesting that you were talking about in the integration process. Things actually sometimes get worse.
Oh yeah,
because I feel like that's what happened with me. Like the past however many years I've been doing this. When I started, I felt like things got worse. Like I felt more anxiety and more shame and more anger and more grief, like and emotions intensified like crazy,
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I think that's supposed to happen. And that's what people don't talk about, because it's not sexy to talk about that, like let's talk about the high vibe, like the joy, the gratitude. But like the reality is that those things that you've been suppressing, or that you've been denying, or that you've been judging, or like all that needs to come up. And then there's the shadow element, which is the judgment and the shame and the like pain and the trauma, like all that's coming up. But underneath that is this authentic, like like these emotions you're talking about, those are healthy, but they were probably they were like, what's a good word? What am I trying to say? They were like hidden, or there's a layer of something above that, right?
Right.
And so when you are healing, it's like, and when you want to be your authentic self, when you want to be a whole human being, and whatever, like that includes all these parts of you that you've been shutting down or sequestering or pushing away. And then that also is going to include the shame and these layers of trauma and like these things that have been blocking that. And so integration is fucking messy, healing, or whatever you want to call it, that process of like, first you begin the journey, and then the journey is like, like it's mucky, it's but again, it's like you're embodying throughout the way, you're having insights, realization throughout the way, you're integrating different things throughout the way. It's not just like this, we're talking about it as if it's just like one process, which it might be in some way, but it's multifaceted, and you're doing multiple different parts of yourself and integrating multiple parts of yourself at different times. And the shadows are, in a sense, good, they really are. I think that's a lot of the healing comes from that. Would you agree? Would you say that makes sense given what you said?
Yeah, for sure. I'm still trying to, get in touch with my shadow and integrate that. Sure. There's a lot of things in my body that I'm trying to integrate. So I'm like, let's like speed it up, man.
Yeah.
For
sure. Yeah, I was the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn, I had a question, but totally forgot. Oh, but yeah, just switching gears here, to the topic of spirituality.
Yeah.
And where does spirituality come in all of this healing and men's work and all this different stuff?
I'm just pausing for a second and like feeling my body. I could feel all the ideas and this passion coming out of me, but I'm like, oh, whew, just breathing. Okay. So spirituality. Um, uh, I immediately I want to cry, and I think it's because spirituality is just like it's a beautiful thing for me. You know, like I've gone through a lot of experiences of finding trust, I guess you could say, right? It's like finding trusting the universe, falling, and it's like there, even when it's dark as hell. And it's gotten to a point where I think, you know, given within the context of what we're talking about, there's so many different levels to it. But the biggest level might be that there's something holding us. There's always something holding and carrying us that's bigger than us, that's in everything, that's around us, that's, you know, it's always here. You know, it's even us. And the fact that it's there is it just it I don't know, I feel um uh yeah, there's not really a word for it, but like, you know, it's the tears. It's like I'm touched by how spirituality is actually inseparable from everything. You know, it's like it's just a part of who we are, part of life, part of the universe. There's not really a way to put it into words, but yeah, like so I guess it just feels like a trusting thing, right? It feels like something is always carrying me and carrying other people. And I think I know that. I think I know that in some ways I've embodied it, not 100%, obviously, but it informs my work with people, right? It's like no matter what
Okay.
somebody is going through, I'm able to somehow allow the growth to always be, and the healing or the 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 evolution, like I really do think that consciousness is always evolving. Consciousness is like we as human beings with each successive generation, like we're becoming more evolved, and you can do that, and I'm doing that in a way with my clients when I'm being present with them. I'm allowing that evolution and that change to happen quicker, and I think that's a spiritual process. I think there's something insanely spiritual about transformation and what we call healing uh, in a way that I couldn't really summarize, I think. But that going back to the trust thing, it's like that it's something um, maybe benevolent, right? It's something that it always has our best interest in mind. And maybe to go back to the topic of tough love and like kind of nurturing love, the universe is the same way, right? Like it's like sometimes healing is very nurturing, like, you know, and pleasant, and, you know, like relieving. And then sometimes it's just like these intense shadow shit that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And like literally experiencing through life. But that is also always in service of your growth, always in service of you embodying more of your soul and who you are. And I'm lucky that I feel like, you know, I mean, I guess I don't know if it's just luck because I've had to learn it the hard way, but it's through lots of trials and really intense things, and probably something from like my ancestors, or, you know, just that I've been able to hold that perspective through my own process and through the process I hold for other people. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing, I think, um, to know and to feel. So I know it's hard. Yeah, it's there's nothing tangible there, but it's just that's my perspective on that. I guess
Yeah.
we can get a little more tangible if you want.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because it seems to me, and of course, there's so many different traditions in spirituality, right? But it seems to me in the circles that I'm more familiar with, um, they talk about like dissolving the ego, that we're
Okay.
all one, right? And it's all love, and I believe all that. But it seems to me that that's almost the opposite of what a lot of traditional therapy and what you're talking about being a self, about being a
Yeah,
individual,
yeah, yeah.
right? Like, how do we reconcile those
Mm,
ideas?
okay. So there's, I think the reconciliation happens in humanness, right? So actually, there's let me pause for a second because I know where I want to go with this. If you want to be enlightened, if you want to be awakened, if you want to be your full potential, if you want to be your true self, whatever it is, it is going to require your. So the ego is a structure. The ego is actually an identity. It's a structure. It can change identities, but it's our connection to this human experience, society, relationships. Who are you? Like what roles do you play? Like it's actually like how do you get on a bus, right? Like riding a bus requires a functioning ego. Like you need to know that there's the fuck a bus is. It's a thing that transports people, pay money. Like these are all very egoic things. And so we need to have that to function in society. As far as like, thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, like this wasn't as needed. Like you could just literally stay in one place in this mountain, not talk to anybody, not ride any buses, not like deal with your family or relation, like, intimate, like and there you don't need an ego. Like that's why you see some of these old sages and enlightened people like on YouTube or whatever, like these Indian sages on these like thrones being carried, but they're just like staring off into space. Yeah, perhaps they're enlightened, right? Like they probably are, but they don't have a fucking ego because they don't need one. They could live without an ego. As human beings in the Western world in the 21st century, we need an ego. Like an ego is required. And that's and the reason why I'm saying that is because this enlightenment thing, this awakened thing, at least as it is now, this being your true self thing, that is going to be, you can call it spirit, I don't know what to call it, energy, right? Pure energy, authentic, like this energy filtering through that ego. Like one of the theories that I learned actually in my grad school, this wasn't all in my counseling program, like I took other classes in other departments,
Sure.
but there's like this process of spiritual development, and it's called uh, basically they look at the ego and they look at kind of soul or spirit or something. I forgot what they call it, and they track this relationship of the ego uh, throughout development and spiritual development and human development. And then the end result is that the ego is actually in service of this transcendent thing, right? So it's like the ego actually becomes a function, a tool, something for this, and to clear up that ego so that it's a clear channel for spirit or whatever. This is great. I don't talk about this stuff a lot, but that is going to require you doing healing work. If you have blockages in your
Interesting.
ego, if you have blockages in yourself or trauma or places where you don't fully trust or aren't, like whatever it is, you have to clear that out. And you can't just clear it out like, oh, okay, I'm going to move this and now I'm like open. Like you have to do the work of doing the embodiment process like we're talking about. Like you literally have to change. Ego is also the body. Like you have to change these aspects of who you are, your identity, your body, your nerve, such that it is now able to express these energies, the spiritual energy. And we didn't talk about sexual energy, but life force energy, right? Like this is all now going to express through your ego, what we call an ego. So I think it's just maybe a definition problem. It's like we think the ego is bad because it's like takes us away from, it's like separation and all that. But the fact is that we are both one with everything, and we're also not, man. Like you're
Right.
literally talking to me from wherever you are in Plano, right? And
Yeah,
like
yeah.
and I'm and so like we're separate beings as well. And the fact that a lot of the spiritual communities don't like understand that or talk about it in that way, I think that's a problem. I think it
Yeah.
really creates a lot of more suffering, more disconnection, and more like ego. It kind of taps into this ego thing, like I'm bad, and this is the way I'm going to be good, so I need to latch on to this. When it's like,
Right.
yeah, your humanness actually is how can you embrace your humanness? How can you embrace that and make it a part of this mission, this purpose that you're here for, whether it's through relationships or whatever, your career. So yeah, I used to think that way as well, until I learned to that like life is beautiful, life is spiritual, like everything has that in it. If everything is one, that means like literally everything, like literally your fucking ego has it too, right? Like it has to. Right? So like there's something weird going on with the whole spiritual stuff. I think it's just
Yeah.
a different time, to be honest. Like we're trying to translate old traditions into a very new time that
Yeah.
it won't translate. So we need a new definition.
It's a fair point, man.
Yeah.
The way, I guess, actually a complaint I guess I have, just from my personal experience, I feel like the overemphasis of like, no, you got to get rid of your ego and we're all one. And it actually, for someone like me who's like more neurotic and codependent, I think it actually exacerbates that. It's like this, you got to be like one with everything. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
like then like, damn, I don't even have an ego right now. Like
Right.
so,
Right.
yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so going back to, the Asian thing and the self, like I think you need a self first before you can do all that. And maybe they're not mutually exclusive, but like what I've found with a lot of like the gurus in the West, that and a lot of people actually in spirituality in general, they come from the world of the ego already. They come from a world of already having sort of developed the self, and they're working, you know regular jobs, and just and then now they find spirituality, so their ego is sort of like intact, I would say.
Right.
And they're now transmuting it, transforming it. But for people like you, maybe, or definitely me, where like the ego isn't even all that able to function optimally in a society like the West, with emotions and relationships and like boundaries, like that's important to also work on and develop as well.
Right.
And it's also empowering, like if you just worked on that, like the spiritual stuff probably um, will take care of itself. To be honest, I kind of think that's true. I don't know, like I guess I
Yeah.
kind of did both, but I'm
Yeah.
rambling. Yeah,
I and I'm
does that make sense?
yeah, no, it does. So
Yeah.
something came to mind, right? So I'll just share this, man. So without going into details, I've had one plant medicine experience.
Okay.
When I did it, they didn't tell us what it was, so I had no
Oh,
idea what to
whoa.
expect, right?
Whoa.
So I took it, and I'm thinking I'm gonna have this oneness experience, right? I'm gonna be at the feet of Christ, and I'm just gonna be one with the universe. Did not happen at all.
Hmm.
Not at all. It was the exact opposite.
Sure.
And when I was on that, I was like, holy shit, I feel more like an individual than I've ever been. I feel normal. Like, is
Whoa.
this what it feels like to be normal and not like hate myself?
Mm,
Whoa. It was the opposite effect. I was like, I
mm.
am the most individual person that I've ever been. So it's just what you said kind of reminded me of that. And
That's cool.
so I've been learning hypnosis and everything, right?
Right.
Oh dude, is that a
It's a cat.
cat? Nice.
Yeah.
I went to this hypnosis workshop where actually the topic was like psychedelics and using hypnosis to kind of guide a psychedelic experience, I suppose.
Hmm.
And so the guy that was practicing on me, had me remember this time and get insights from it. And I felt like in that moment, my unconscious was saying like, dude, this is everything. That insight of being an individual and being self-accepting, like that's everything.
Mm-hmm.
So just like what you said kind of reminded me of that.
Was that the beginning of all the shadow stuff happening?
No, I mean,
Okay.
that was like this year.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been a few years.
That's a
It's
cool
been a few
experience. It's
years.
cool that you were
Yeah.
able to like that it was so clearly that experience. And that's one of the things that I really that I don't talk about with a lot of Asian people, but it was one of the first things that I talked about when I first started working with Asian folks, because I was like, this is the most important thing. Like by far, through my journey, from what I have constantly observed from Asian people in general, like they just need to learn how to be an individual self and be okay with that. You know, um, it's not okay, and that's it's deep. It's like a culturally, generations and generations and generations of that. So like the self
Mm.
emerging is going to be very intense, but it's also going to be the path towards feeling more fulfillment. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I think it's uh, cool that you were able to have such a clear, like direct experience of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think, and since you're probably more in Western circles, like they're not going to really understand it as much, I think. But yeah, I think given the context of growing up in an Asian family, it makes a lot of sense to me, and I think you can trust that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was a profound experience. It was, I wouldn't say there were no like lasting effects from this particular plant medicine, but it showed me what was possible.
Mhm.
So, and it kind of
Yeah.
opened up that door, I suppose, for
Sure.
me. So,
Mhm. Got a little
um,
glimpse.
you mentioned sexual energy.
Yeah.
Could you maybe expound on that and then like, what is that? Why is that important? How do
Sure.
we cultivate that?
Um. Okay. How much longer do you want to go? By the way,
Yeah, maybe another
like
another 10 minutes. Would
20
that?
minutes sounds good. Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Cool.
Um. What was the question? Just like, what is sexual energy, or like what
Yeah.
is it?
What
Okay.
is it? Why talk about it? Why is it important for us?
So to say it succinctly, I would just say that picture in the back of the painting, sexual energy is the thing that comes up underneath from the first chakra up through the channels. So that's what I would call sexual energy. So without sexual energy, without opening up to your sex, we all have life energy because we're fucking alive, but a lot of us don't have very much of life. Like we're suppressing it. We might have more like death energy, like that passion to live and be yourself, or to express yourself, or to be happy, successful, fulfilled. Like that is, I would say, a lot of that is life energy. And so in some ways that's sexual energy, but when you really learn how to see sexual energy as that energy, as I'm talking about, like literally coming up from the earth through your fucking channel, because we are human beings, we're animals, like this is going to drive so much um yeah, I guess that's just one way to illustrate it. Is so there's that energy, and then there's another energy that's coming down, which is spiritual energy. Those are the two primary energies. So sexual energy, or earth, Jesus, life energy, life energy, and then spiritual energy. And both of those energies are important for human beings to be their full selves. Like that's enlightenment to me, is the spiritual energy coming down, this life energy coming up, and those integrating into the heart. Those are also going to clear
Mm.
out your channels and help you embody different parts of your identity, your true identity. But the two coming together into the heart, that's, I think, the goal for humans. That's spiritual
Okay.
energy and sexual energy. It's like
So
earth energy, or animal, like kind of primal instinctual energy, and then like spiritual energy.
interesting. And now that you're saying that, and I'm thinking masculine and feminine. I don't know if that
Yeah,
actually
yeah, I think that's
applies in
true.
this case.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Maybe
Spiritual
like a
energy,
balance. Yeah.
masculine. Yeah, the earth, the sexual energy. It's feminine. It's it's Shakti, in Hindu tradition, the Kundalini stuff. That's all they say is feminine energy, and I think that's true. You know, corresponds with like Earth being Mother Earth and feminine, more nurturing, healing.
Interesting. Okay. I would have gone
Yeah.
the opposite. Thinking.
Why?
Okay.
Because sexuality is so correlated with masculinity.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess more like primal. I think of primal and masculine.
Yeah, I mean, it expresses in different ways when it comes into our bodies, but the pure energy itself is sexual energy is potential. It's like it doesn't exist yet as like this formulated energy. It's just exists as potential. It's like there's nothing there. That's why it's feminine. It's dark. It's like when you just imagine going deep into the earth's crust or like deep. It's just like fucking dark and dense. But there's like that's kind of the feminine sexual source of sexual energy, source of all of life. So dark. But then when you awaken that and allow that to awaken, then you need some structure. That's the masculine, and then that energy comes through and all that. But yes, and when that energy also, that's life energy that comes into our bodies, and it expresses differently for males or females. And then spiritual energy is masculine because it's very everything's differentiated. Like whereas sexual energy or life force energy or earth energy is unformulated and dark, and there's nothing there. It's just potential. It's just the source of energy. Spiritual energy is like very differentiated. Like it's knowing, right? It's like gnosis. Everything is clear. There's a lot of light. It's just like you see things. You see the difference between things. There's like an experience of everythingness, which is everything. Like everything is there. That's oneness, right? But there's also this oneness of the feminine energy, this dark deep, which is like the nothingness. That's also oneness as well. But anyways, these are energies that when we learn how to bring them into our bodies and especially our hearts, that's really what's going to create it's like our animal nature, spiritual nature coming together. That's like the full human being. It's that's the potential that we all have. And I don't subscribe to this notion that sexual energy is bad or sex is bad. Again, like this ego dissolution thing. Like I think it's a very pure experience, and I think it can be a very spiritual experience as well. But it's more importantly, it's essential for us to open up to this energy, this life force energy, this sexual energy. It vitalizes us. It allows us to be. It gives us the energy to. It powers everything. It powers our expression. It powers authenticity. It helps us heal. It's like our body is vital. Our body is healthy. That's all sexual energy. And if you don't have that, you're just like, if you go to these monasteries. I've been to a lot of places where people go to meditate. I forgot ashrams and shit, and they're just like ghosts. They're just like walking around like slow and like old, and they're just pale. Like they just have no life energy because they're trying to ascend. They're trying to get away from life, and it's probably because they feel ashamed of their own sexuality. But when you really learn to harness that energy, it's like, yeah, the primal energy is there. Like you're just a vital person, and that goes a long way for us. I think that's a good spiritual practice as well, to be honest.
So how do we do that? Is that through breathing?
No, breath is breath. Yeah, you could do it. I think breath is important. I think it's different for everybody. What I've noticed, oh gosh, I don't know. I've tried teaching this. I've tried to teach this of late to people, especially Asian men, but it's hard. I think the work that I did was really unique and special, and I think it's what allowed me to embody it in a really whole way. It's kind of like tantra, but it's not. I again, sort of like the spiritual stuff around ego dissolution. Like a lot of tantra is it's a Western version of a pure teaching, and it kind of dilutes it, and it kind of makes it like, let's just bliss out and let's just like feel pleasure, and it's like that's such a small part of what happens when you awaken sexual energy. So I guess you can do it through one. You got to clear any trauma. I think the biggest thing for me was, one of the things that I was thinking about before this podcast is there's so many things that you can't manufacture when it comes to authenticity. Like you can't fake, like I can't make somebody do this work, or maybe they just want to feel better, but here I am, like I can make you into the person that, like the most authentic, fulfilled person in the world. But like, if you don't want that, then, if that's not a value for you, it's not there. So the reason why I say that is because I found this work and it opened me up in a way that I just knew, again, if I want to be myself, right? Going back to the beginning, it's like, I just want to be myself. What does that mean? Oh, there's something here about sexual energy that I need to embody. And then through this work of like putting my hands on other people's genitals and like meditating in a very safe, it wasn't sexual in this, I'm going to turn them on, or this is for pleasure, or this is like, like it wasn't about the other person. It was actually about our own experience. So this human being and even me, we're allowing each other to experience basically energy. So sexual energy, whether it's in me or it's in another human being, like when I'm touching their genitals, I'm actually feeling myself, experiencing my own sexual life. I'm experiencing life energy, life force energy, sexual energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also noticing the blocks that come up in me because of that. Right. So yes, when you can get over that, which I got over really quickly, the fact that I'm touching another person's genitals, right? And this is just somebody's body, and this is just sexual life energy. And the fact that it was held in that way by these facilitators is what I think is really special, because I haven't really experienced it like that before anywhere else. So it's just about being human. It's just very matter of fact. It's very much about like your own awareness and developing your awareness and where you might have certain things come up around your experience of sexual energy, or there was also spiritual energy. But it's through this relationship, it's embodied, it's through this human interaction. And it was also very fun and like, so intimate and healing for everybody. It was just a really amazing kind of workshop experience. And I did that for a few years. But I don't know, even like some people might have done that workshop and not have had the same experience as me. They didn't, but for me, it awoke some really powerful stuff. It was like, pure energy. Like some people were just like, they had their own theories. Maybe they had done Tantra before. But for me, kind of coming in without any preconception, it was like, holy shit, like sexual energy is life force energy. It's in all of us. It's this like deep source of potential. And it was like, whoa. And like through these meditations, it was just like blasting through my system. And that was actually the first insight or realize, like that was kind of the experience. And then it took years to integrate. Then I think I don't know if I've mentioned to you, but I was having like orgasms a few years later without any physical contact. Like I wasn't touching myself. Nobody was touching me. I'm literally driving, or like I was in a parking lot and just like having intense orgasms just running through my body.
Well, I'm glad you were in your car and now outside, right?
Yeah. Right. So yeah, it was that was the embodiment process for me. Right. So if we're talking about that process, it was like I was literally embodying sexual energy. And so, it was a process. I don't really know how to talk about it. Like it's almost something that I just experienced myself. And, I think it's the good thing is everybody has it. Like everybody has access to this. But it does require quite a bit of courage, because it's a spiritual journey as well. Like to really tap into that deep feminine, sexual like energy, that potential, or that sort, that's insane. Like it's there's nothing there, right? So to like be comfortable and sit in that space that's ego dissolution. Like that is literally how you go through ego death. And not a lot of people are we're too in our heads to really be comfortable in a space where we're not knowing, where there's nothing, literally. And so that might be an inhibiting factor for a lot of people, I think, and for spirituality too, spiritual energy. But it's a deep process, and I'm saying that because I went through that deep process to awaken these energies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
for sure.
how can people contact you and if they want to work with you?
So yeah, I have the Facebook group, Embodied Asian Man. And yeah, I am working only with Asian men at the moment, but I'm always thinking about opening it, and not limiting it just to Asian people. I work with people one-on-one on a case-by-case basis. I don't open that up to everybody. But yeah, I'm running a mastermind right now for Asian men. We don't go into depth we don't go as deep as we did in this conversation, but this is the frame I hold, right? And if people are listening, then they probably can feel something, I hope, because this is embodied for me and these are my experiences. So I hope there's some sort of transmission, because I think people will feel it even if they don't understand it. They'll feel it in their body, they'll feel some reaction, and then they get drawn to work with me. But I'm like, this is a lot of work that I did, but I am holding, this is informing my work, and this is the space I hold. And I think this is why, it allows for people to heal. So I would just say there's the Facebook group. You can follow me on IG as well. Awakened Masculine. I forgot my social. Yeah, I'm in such a constant evolution with my business of how do I bring these types of conversations and this type of work into programs, right? Into content, it's hard. This isn't stuff that people are going to understand. They're not gonna immediately, because I've written about stuff like this. I've tried to make content about these things, but it's not something that is really that you get through social media, or you can get through just through a computer screen. But it's also just not where we're at as a society, as a culture, as a species, really. Like there's still a lot of evolution that needs to happen. I'm not saying I'm like the most evolved person, but these types of things of focusing on who we are as human beings and these essential aspects, whether it's sexual, spiritual, or the stuff around therapy, that's not where we're oriented, So, but anyways, I'm just saying, yeah, a lot of things are always changing. So you can follow me and join the group. Just reach out to me if you have questions or are interested in potentially working with me, and we could have a conversation. But yeah, this was good. This was a good conversation. Appreciated it.
I appreciate you coming on, man. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah. We covered a lot.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will have those links in the description. So I'll see you guys. Peace out.
All right. Bye. Thanks, everyone.